building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. I am Dion Lim, and you're watching Getting Answers live here on ABC 7. Now, what we do is we ask experts your questions every day at 3 o'clock to get you answers in real time. We've got a jam-packed show for you today, starting by talking about the state's drought manager and asking the burning question, do we have enough water to get through the year? Also, we'll discuss how to cut emissions to zero. The co-author of Speed and Scale joins us to tell us what we need to do. But first, a very familiar face, Dr. Alok Patel, joining us with the latest on COVID-19. I do want to remind everyone that we are live on Facebook.com/ABC7 News as well. Ask your questions. Doctor, I feel like it's been so long since we've seen you. You've been jet setting, being on Good Morning America, etc.
I have been doing some jet setting, Dion, but I am always here representing the ABC 7 family. There are no worries about that.
I love the
It's
dedication.
good to be here with you.
Yes, and your pin certainly reflects your jet setting ways, your paper airplane.
I'm impressed with your eye that you were able to tell what the pin was.
Well, we have a very big monitor, so I kind of get a little bit of help that way.
That's fair. Okay.
Okay, don't want to waste any time because we've got a lot of questions. Let's start with the second COVID booster. It is here. It started rolling out in the Bay Area this week. The San Francisco Department of Public Health just started offering it today. Tell us, who do you think needs to get it?
You know, it doesn't even come down to who I think needs to get it. It's what the recommendation is for, what the data shows. The recommendation right now is for anyone above the age of 50 who may be higher risk or who wants a little bit of extra protection. The data that we've seen mostly from overseas is very clear about people above the age of 65. So that 50 to 60 range is a little bit of an area of gray. And people out there should look at their individual risks, any medical conditions. But if you're relatively healthy and you're between 50 and 60, you have all the right in the world to wait a little bit and not necessarily race to go get a shot. And if you're under 50, you have nothing right now to worry about. The most important thing we need to remind people is that the first 3 shots are still doing an incredible job in preventing deaths and severe illness.
I like that you mentioned that because when we first heard that 50 number, to me it seemed exceptionally young in comparison to the traditionally high-risk age group. And this brings me to the second question of the reluctance that people may be having now, because we've talked throughout the pandemic about the fatigue. Things are improving. Do we really need this extra shot?
You know, Dion, that's why I feel like these new recommendations have to be balanced with the data we already have so that people don't lose trust. Because what we've already seen when we're announcing a second booster, especially when that announcement is coming from the pharma CEOs, is people are running on Twitter and they're saying, what happened to the first 3 shots? Do they no longer work? That's why we have to be very clear about where this data is coming from. And when scientists mention that antibody levels are dropping 4 months after the second booster, that we're reminded that antibodies are just one measurement of the immune system, that the cellular immunity, the other arm, is still doing a great job. And I'm glad that people are sharing the latest information from the CDC that during the Omicron surge, that 2 shots plus a booster were over 90% effective at preventing severe illness. So we have to make sure that we're balancing all this, because guess what? We still have only about a third of Americans overall who have gotten their first booster.
Wow.
And we're now talking about the second one. So we still have some catch up to do.
Yeah, and I think sometimes being in the Bay Area, we forget about the situation across the country. So that certainly plays a role into the number that you just mentioned. I do want to give a quick shout out to Philip joining us once again on Facebook. And Phil, who writes in to say, I want a J&J second booster. I am 65 years old and have COPD. He's probably a good candidate for that.
I would say based on that, just generally speaking, someone who's 65 and has an underlying medical condition, you are a candidate to go out and get the booster. And I would, if you have any reluctance about it, I would chat with the healthcare professional about it. But that is someone who, if that was my family member, my uncle, especially in a time when we are not out of the pandemic, and that we may see an Omicron BA2 surge, I would say, sure, get the second booster. It's indicated.
All right, well, speaking of the BA2 surge, potentially, if we see that, knock on wood, you know, this seems to be, for lack of a better term, maybe the ugly stepchild of Omicron. What do we know?
It's hard to call it the ugly stepchild. Maybe it's just a step cousin of sorts, because this is still a subvariant of BA1. It is more transmissible and more contagious, that we've seen that data, but there is no data to suggest that it's more virulent, that it's causing more severe disease. And the important information is that immunity against Omicron BA1 is still protective, as we know, against BA2. But Dion, as you mentioned, cases are down right now. This is the moment that we should be preparing for what could potentially happen for BA2. So not only does it come down to making sure people are vaccinated, but that we're paying attention to things such as safely reopening schools, antivirals, making sure that we have everything in place so that if there is another surge in the future, we're not playing catch up again.
Yeah, a lot of caution with those rollout plans across the board, across many industries. I want to say that we see you, we hear you on Facebook. Brenda Madge asking, do they still administer the J&J? Do you know, doctor?
The J&J is still available, absolutely. And there even is a plan with the CDC that has been rolled out of what you should be doing about the third and second booster if you got J&J as your primary series. So it is still available. Okay, also good to know. I do want to get to this question before we play a little bit of a new game that has to do with Twitter. We'll get to that in a second. But, you know, I read today that Congress may approve $10 billion in emergency COVID funding. That is definitely short of the, $22.5 billion that Biden had requested initially. But I like to think that's better than nothing, right? I would like to think that's better than nothing. I mean, it's still hard to believe that we're making concessions right now when it comes to protecting those who are most vulnerable in the event of another surge in late summer or early fall. But also this money has to do with global aid as well. And Dion, I'll be quick with this. This is what it comes down to. We still have at least 7 million Americans who are immunocompromised. There's 30 million Americans at least who are uninsured. And if this money's gone, we can stop counting on free vaccines, free antivirals, free monoclonal antibody treatments, and that is only going to widen disparity in the future. So that is what the underlying argument is all about, is how do we safely protect those in the event of a future surge equitably and make sure that everyone has equal access and we're protected.
This next question goes along with a viewer comment because I want to talk about the future. People still getting at risk of being infected, particularly those who are immunocompromised. Someone writes in to say that they've gotten all the shots, still managed to get COVID. What do you have to say to ease any fears there are about another shot?
You know, I'm glad people ask this question so that we can just once again remind people that catching COVID, testing positive on that PCR test, which is extremely sensitive, is very different than actually getting severe COVID-19 winding up in the hospital. And you can still absolutely test positive, but if you've got the vaccine and you have those antibodies and you have protection, your immune system will stop the process of the SARS-CoV-2 virus taking you to the hospital. And that is what the vaccines were designed to do. So I would not freak out if you're fully vaccinated and you test positive. That does not by any means mean that the vaccines did not work.
Yeah, you have been saying this throughout the pandemic, so I'm glad you are reiterating it once again. Okay, time now to play a new game called React to the Tweets. This is a Dr. Patel formulated game special. The first one that we want to pull up, if we can, on the screen is from Dr. Lucky Tran. This individual says they keep saying, we have the tools we need to live with COVID-19, but with federal funding running out, tests and treatments are no longer free for uninsured, and vaccines could be next. Just because the tools exist doesn't mean the people who need them most can access them. Oof, a lot to unload here, doctor.
I am giving a snap to that because this is similar to what we were just talking about. There's a lot of privilege when we say things like, ask your doctor if you have symptoms, go get tested, get an antiviral. But as Dr. Tran mentions, if we run out of funding, we run out of access for this, they're not going to be accessible by a lot of people. So I'm glad that tweets like this are going around. Yeah, not to mention it's very on trend for what we had just asked moments ago. So that's good to hear that, you know, people are engaging on that topic of funding. The next tweet that we have, pulling it up, this is from Eric Topol on the subject of ivermectin. The largest randomized double-blind trial yet conducted with early treatment indicates there is no difference compared with placebo. It doesn't work, period. First off, I have to preface this by saying I'm not sure who Eric Topol is. If he is a healthcare professional. Doctor, maybe you can weigh in on this. Eric Topol is absolutely a professional who runs the Scripps Institute part of the Scripps Institute in Southern California and has been a foremost leader in providing evidence-based information. And, you know, if you look at this tweet and you go in the comments, people are still reluctant to admit that there is no data to support ivermectin. And that has truly shown us is that we have work to do in the future when it comes to transparency and rebuilding trust. There is a whole faction out there who is still saying we are not going to get vaccinated, but we will march and go and take unproven treatments. And there's a lot to talk about there. We can't assume that just because vaccines and actual treatments are available, that they're going to be used responsibly. Ivermectin doesn't work. There is no responsible study that proves it, but people will still go out and try to take it.
Yeah, not to mention, I remember during the pandemic, there were so many rumors online that needed to be dispelled. Wasn't there one about, I think it was bleach, or maybe it was boiling water? Really detrimental effects for some people.
Oh, absolutely. And Dion, this just speaks to the fact that we have created this huge divide and almost tribalism and what people want to believe when it comes to the pandemic, rather than just going straight down the line and saying, here's what the science says, here's what works. And I hope in the future that we remember this and we don't completely politicize the next pandemic or the next major scientific topic, because all it has done is sowed a lot of mistrust and has unfortunately led to unnecessary illness and deaths.
Yeah, and I think we have enough time for one last tweet, if we can pull that up. This one is from Dr. Tom Frieden, who writes to say at least 15 million people over the age of 65 in the U.S. are not up to date on their vaccination. Unfortunately, if you're one of those people, Omicron may be coming for you. The most important thing we can do to limit the impact of another COVID increase is to get people vaccinated. Thoughts on this one?
Yes, this is very similar to what we were just talking about. We keep comparing our situation to what was happening in the UK. In the UK, they had over 80 to 90%. It was something like that of people above the age of 65 who got their first booster. Here in the United States, we are far below that number. We're something like 65% of that population has gotten their first booster. Less than half, Dion, of people who are fully vaccinated have gotten their first booster as well. So when we're even talking about the second booster, when we're talking about waning antibodies, there are plenty of people out there who are not fully up to date, who are essentially targets for Omicron should we see another surge.
All right, I think we're out of time. I want to say thank you to everyone who is writing in on Facebook. Lots of questions. I apologize if we couldn't get to all of them, but Dr. Patel, hopefully we'll have you on our show once again soon.
We will, Dion, and don't worry, I was warned to not try to do an April Fool's pranks. I'm just going to say happy Friday.
I thank my producer, Mike Sterling, today for saying, no, that ain't happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next time. All right, well, coming up, the state just completed its latest snow survey this morning. The results, not that good. We'll talk about that and much more. The show continues on Facebook.com/ABC7News. All right, thank you. And also I should say thank you to Douglas, our director, who also prevented that April Fool's joke from happening. So I'm very glad about that. Thank you all so much. As always, Augusta writing in to say, let me see. Oh, it looks like my Facebook continues to scroll. But here, Steve Rodriguez says, SF General turned me away because I'm 68. The state has not approved for seniors unless they have serious ailment and compromised immunity. I told them I was diabetic, and they said, no, come back later. I'm sorry you had that experience. Hopefully next time we have our COVID experts, our doctors on, we can get to your question. Everybody, if you are tuning in from the Bay Area or beyond, please let us know. As always, we appreciate hearing where you are coming to us from. We are getting now to our next guest to talk about really the levels of rain that we've had and the drought situation still very dire. Let us know how this is perhaps affecting you, and not just with your concerns, but also are you cutting back on your water consumption? Is that something that is at the forefront of your mind? We are about 1 minute out from getting back onto the air. Augusta says there should be video on YouTube. Are you talking about the show? We are streaming it here on Facebook and also on ABC7, which you can get a number of places. Streaming as well. On the app, for example, yes, thank you, Douglas, letting us know. And hey, Mike, if you don't mind giving me a time cue for this next segment that will help me pace everything, that would be super helpful. Okay, we are 30 seconds out. I also remind everyone, if we run out of time, if there's something that you'd like to ask me or any comments, I welcome anything, as long as it's not hateful or bullying behavior. I am Dion Lim TV on all social media platforms. And as you see right here, facebook.com/ABC7News and our website, abc7news.com. Great place to find resources on all things COVID and also coming up with our Building a Better Bay Area. Welcome back, everybody. Now, unless we get a heavy dose of rain and snow in April and May, we'll be experiencing one of the driest starts to spring in decades. The Department of Water Resources took its monthly measurement at Phillips Station in the Sierra this morning, and check it out. The snow that had accumulated over the winter pretty much has melted, and that is not a good sign. Statewide, we are at just 38% of normal for water content. So, joining me now is Janine Jones, Department of Water Resources Drought Manager for the state of California. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, happy to join you all, but wish it was on a wet day instead of a dry one.
Agreed. Wish it was under better circumstances. And to illustrate that, we do have a drought map that we'd like to pull up and show everybody how the state is in that severe orange category. You see the rankings on your screen. Now that includes the Bay Area. There are pockets of red as well, indicating extreme dry conditions. Janine, it is so hard to believe that the snow survey is so low, considering how much rain and snow we got back in October, December, early January. What are your thoughts?
Well, the problem is that the rain stopped after the end of December, and we have had record dry conditions in much of the state for January, February, and March, and also warm conditions. So that means the snow that we did have earlier in this season is now rapidly starting to melt.
Yeah, I think people forget that this is a continual path that we're on, that it's not just one and done. One rainstorm is not going to make up for the lack of precipitation that we've had.
And we are seeing drought conditions really that have been very persistent. You may recall that our last drought was in 2012 to 2016, and one could argue that we've really been in drought since 2012, just interrupted by an occasional wet year.
Yeah, and I'm just being told that we actually have some video of the snow survey to illustrate from March 1st. And as we take a look at that, I do want to ask you about snowpack levels as well, because the April survey shows 38% of that average. That is an incredibly low start to the year. How does that stack up to the snow survey in March that I just mentioned?
Well, actually, it's not so much low in the big picture context, because if you think about our last drought, we actually had in 2014 tied a then record low of 25% of average, and then in 2015 we had 5% of average. So we are certainly better than those conditions, but it's not just about how much snow is there, it's also about how much water runs off from the snow. And what we're seeing with the warming conditions is that we have less productive conditions in terms of runoff.
Yeah, what does this mean for us long term? Because we are sometimes so focused on the forecast immediately. What about climate change and the role that also plays?
That's a great question, because we are clearly seeing impacts of climate change now in our hydrologic system, basically looking at the 21st century in comparison to the 20th century. And we are seeing exacerbated and enhanced drought impacts compared to what we saw in prior droughts. And this is just a warning to us that we really need to start focusing on adaptation actions, because we're transitioning to a drier situation overall.
Yeah, great segue into our last question for you is, what tangible actions can we do? Because I just read today about out of UC Merced that 400,000 acres will be idle for farmers because of this water situation. That affects all of us.
And, you know, certainly the governor has already asked all Californians to conserve. But if we think about what do we need to do, sort of the longer term focus, a big issue is preparing to respond to diminished snowpack in the future. And that's why we are starting to work with water agencies on pilot projects for forecast informed reservoir operations, to be able to use weather forecasts to more effectively manage reservoir storage during the wintertime, so that we can better respond to either wet or dry conditions.
Okay, something we will continue to follow very closely, something that I know our viewers are chiming in about. We're just running out of time right now. So Janine Jones, Department of Water Resources, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, up next, we will be talking to a man who has an actual plan for solving our climate crisis. You will not want to miss it. Stay with us. All right, thank you everybody for your thoughtful questions. We had a little bit of a shorter segment, so I wanted to make sure Janine had plenty to say. It was very eye-opening seeing that map and how severe the drought situation continues to be. Alex writing in, hello. As always, nice to have you. Get a booster for your boosters and boosters. Try Win Duong. Thank you for your kind feedback. I really appreciate that. Augusta saying she has a fire app because her parents lost their home in Santa Rosa. I'm so sorry to hear about that. And they had to rescue her grandma at 3:30 in the morning, had to drive through flames to get out. So yes, certainly, keeping an eye on that with apps, and then also monitoring the weather situation and really adhering to any recommendations for evacuations helps so much. A quick note, hey, Douglas and Mike, do you mind giving me a couple more time cues as we get a little bit closer? I want to make sure that I don't, when we're in the actual segment, that would help me a lot. Robert, I'm not sure what you were saying, never to, but maybe that's to a booster. I'm not sure. How about, let's see, reading through comments right now. Thank you all. We have dozens that I'm trying to get through. Okay. Yeah, if you have any questions about zero emissions, our next guest is a co-author of a book with an actionable plan. So that will be coming up in just a few seconds. Okay, can't do anything but weather. Erica, thanks. Great to have you here with us too. All right, we are 5 seconds out. Well, finally, we personally can't do anything about the weather, but we can play a role in helping stop climate change. Ryan Pachadsaram joining us now. He is the co-author of Speed and Scale, which is a book that has been called an action plan for our planet. Ryan, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, let's talk about Speed and Scale and this plan, because to get us to this net zero emissions by 2050 and getting us halfway there by 2030, this sounds like an astronomical goal.
It is. It's an audacious one. I mean, if we started a lot earlier to tackle this crisis, of course, this would be an easier target. But we do have to find the will and the things to do to get halfway, to cut our emissions in half by the end of this decade, and then really to zero by 2050. And that's the charge. And that's what's inside this book called Speed and Scale. It's an action plan for tackling the climate crisis.
Well, you seem very confident that this is doable, that these actions will indeed work. So let's cut right to it. You discussed this concept of cutting emissions. I know there are plans to obviously put more electric cars on the road, but what else can be done in this realm?
Yeah, so the plan has 6 different solutions, right? We use this thing called OKRs, which I'm sure a lot of folks are very familiar with. Their objectives and key results. What are the goals that we're setting? And so we've got to electrify transportation. We've got to decarbonize the grid. We've got to fix food, which means eating less beef, wasting less. We've got to protect nature, which means ending deforestation. Then we've got to build the things like concrete and steel in ways that emit a lot less. And then no matter how aggressive we are with all of our cuts, there's still going to be some carbon emissions left over. And so we've got to find ways using nature as well as engineered means to remove that. And so that's how you get from 59 billion tons a year to zero. And then the second part of the book really captures how we do that quicker, right? Because it may take us a whole century to do those things, but we only have 30 years. And so we're trying to lean on the policy and politics. That's one lever we can pull. We're trying to turn movements into action. That's everything from the boardroom all the way to the ballot box. And then we've got to lean on innovation and investment. And so those are the things that we have to do.
Yeah, certainly a lot to unload. There is a complex plan that you've laid out, but what are some tangible things that people perhaps on a day-to-day basis can practice in their lives?
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned food also. That one really caught my attention.
Of course. So, the entire plan is online at speedandscale.com. And the book is really written for the leader in you, right? To make the actions that our cities need to take, our states need to take, and our countries that need to take. But you asked a specific question, is what can we do? What can you and I do to cut our emissions? I live in San Francisco as well. Mm-hmm. And so for us, it's really, big action number 1, calling up your utility, in this case, PG&E, and switching to the green plan, right? That alone reduces your emissions. The second thing you can do is, if you own a car, committing to making sure that when you're replacing it, it's going to be an electric one, right? Not putting another fossil fuel vehicle on the road. And then the third thing around food is eating less beef. When you look at the emission profile of all the foods we eat, beef is like this much, and then, chicken and tofu and all the other pieces are really so much less. And so when you think about what you're eating, it's not about going vegan. It really is less beef, less cheese, and less lamb.
I like what you said, using the operative word less, because I think that's more attainable than cutting things out. And again, it's so overwhelming of a task. We're trying to reverse decades upon decades of issue and problem here. I do want to wrap things up on a positive note.
Yes.
And the concept of clean energy and how that can equal out to economic opportunity. What are you talking about here?
Oh, so this transition is going to require, of course, a full-scale transformation of the way we live, the way we move, the ways we fly and eat. And so you think about the cleaner alternatives that need to be built, right? The companies that can be created around them. There's so much excitement in the Bay Area of the companies that were created here, from Tesla to Sunrun to Enphase. Those are leading the clean green revolution. And so when you think about 59 billion tons of emissions, those are, someone else's business model, i.e. the fossil fuel business model. And when you think about removing them, those create new ones. And that's an exciting thing. This transformation is going to not only be great for the planet, but be great for the companies and people that end up building them, right? So that's one of the things that gives us a lot of hope.
It does. And Ryan, we have about a minute left. Can you really quickly rattle off some of the people who also contributed to this book, some well-known names, and a little bit about your background as well?
Oh, of course. We're super. So this book, yes, it's co-authored by John Doerr, who's an acclaimed venture capitalist, started the Clean Tech 1.0 movement. And we got really lucky because in writing it, we reached out to 100 different experts, from policymakers to scientists to entrepreneurs. And, we took their learnings, right? There's no way we could capture all the research in the world without talking to these folks and putting them front and center. There are 35 stories in the book as well, too, from the late Ryan Popple, who created Proterra, a Bay Area company, to Christiana Figueres, who helped sign the Paris Agreement with the UN. You've got Doug McMillan, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. There are a lot of incredible people leading on this revolution. And the neat thing is there are heroes here, right? Lifting up folks like that. We feature stories of Greta Thunberg and Larry Fink. I love all their stories.
The list continues. I apologize for cutting you off. We are running out of time. Ryan Panchadsaram, the author of a book that we will include in our Facebook post. Thank you all so much for joining us. Okay, and we will be right back. Stay with us. Okay. All right, 2:15. Let's see. Oh, you know what? We have 2 minutes. Ryan, are you still there with us?
I am still here, yes.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to cut you off. I'm at the mercy of the commercial break.
This is nonstop. It's incredible to watch you work.
Oh my goodness, it's a lot of multitasking. Can you give me an idea? I know you were finishing up that the last question that I had, but how long was the process in getting everyone on board? Because this was a monumental task.
So it started about 2.5 years ago, the Christmas before COVID. John posed the question, what would it look like if you applied OKRs to the climate crisis? And we did it first to help us guide our work, right? Because we invest in clean technologies. We try to support philanthropic groups that are fighting the fight for the planet Earth. And we thought it would help us. And then we started these interviews. It shifted to Zoom because of the pandemic. And we would hit record on them. And we learned so much that we really felt there was no way we could keep those learnings just to ourselves. And so we started turning it into a book. So all of 2020, all of 2021, and we got the book out before the big climate convention in Glasgow that the United Nations hosts. And so we were just hoping. Yeah.
Wow, great timing. And I should say real quickly as well that, as I was kind of going through, the website, et cetera, on a subject that is so incredibly weighty, the way that it's broken down makes it very easily accessible, which I appreciated.
We hopes that, right? When you think about the climate crisis, a lot of the content really paralyzes you, right? It really doesn't move you to act. And that was our hope with the book, is that we do take a first couple of pages to share why.
Sorry, Ryan, I've got to wrap. We're back on TV.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Okay, we are coming back on the air. I just want to remind everybody that Facebook will still be live for the next couple of minutes. But once again, that is Speed and Scale. I will put this in the notes right now. 10 seconds left. Okay, 5 seconds. Here we go. No problem. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Dion Lim. We'll see you for the news at 4. Okay. Thanks, you guys. Sorry about the long-windedness or the... But the problem, Mike, is that...